Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Confident and welcome back to this playlist where I show you how to build your own SaaS product using Cloudflare Workers and related technologies. So starting with this video and in the next couple of videos, I'm going to show you how the web to Kindle platform is built using Cloudflare Workers, and this is going to be really technical, so I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get this done. So what I'm going to do is switch over to my screen so we take a look at how to set up the repository locally, and then we actually start coding. So let's get that done. Over here on my screen, I'm on the Web to Kindle website, and of course, I'm just going to go to the GitHub repository. What we want to do is create a local repository where we can start working on this project. And to make things really easy, the project has a starter zip folder which contains the UI components that you shouldn't need to worry too much about, such as the landing page and also the UI elements for the browser extension. So I'm just going to go get the zip file, and what you want to do is click on the zip link. I'm also going to have this link below in the description. You want to copy the zip URL. So let's copy link address and let's go into the terminal to clone this. So this is going to be widget and paste in the link. So that's going to download the starter folder, which contains the basic Cloudflare Worker and also the UI assets, which we won't be coding up, but we'll be focusing more on the backend logic and how it all works together. So we have the zip file downloaded and we can unzip it. All right, and that should create a folder we can cd into, which is called Web to Kindle starter. So I'm going to clear my screen, and if I do a quick ls, you see that we have a basic Cloudflare Worker, and in fact you can go open this up in your editor of choice. So let's open the index.ts file in my text editor, and you can see that this has like a very simple Cloudflare Worker, and we can launch this by creating a new terminal and running the dev script. All right. Oh, that's because we haven't installed the required packages. So I can just do a quick npm install, and that should install the dependencies, and we can run the dev script. All right, and this works, which is awesome. So if I hit this URL, which is localhost 8787, we should get a response back saying hello world, which is awesome. Now I'm going to quit this server for a minute here, and what we want to do is install some of the dependencies we need. The first one will be installing is Zod, so I'm going to quickly install Zod. So quickly run an npm install Zod, and that's because we'll need Zod to perform validation for the input. That is the URL, and also the user's Kindle email needs to be validated using Zod. So we have Zod installed now, and we can go on to start building the worker server that is going to receive the request, and later on we'll also work on building the workflow that actually runs the various parts of the application. So now we have Zod installed. I'm going to head back here, and what I'm going to do is import Zod. So I want to import Z from Zod. All right, and I want to create a schema for the data. So this is going to be const data, which is going to be Z the object, and this is going to have two keys. One is going to be for the URL, which is a string, and this is a URL string specifically. So this is URL, which is awesome. Then we're also going to have another key for the email, which again is a string, and this is going to be an email string. All right, so that looks good. Now that we have the validation set up, that's the Zod schema, the next thing I want to do is start validating the request. And the first thing I'm going to do here is check if the request was sent to the correct endpoint. So for this article rendering API, it's going to be localhost 8787/send. So we want to check that the request is being sent to the correct endpoint and that it is a post request. So I'm going to do a quick check here. If new URL request the URL the path name, if the path name is not equal to /send, or the request method is not equal to post, then what I want to do here is return a new response saying, hey, this is an invalid request. And we also want to add a status of 400. All right, so if the request is not sent to the right URL or not the right method, this is going to error out and let the user know, hey, you're not sending a proper request. And it seems like we have a typo here. Okay, so I think that's in here. This should be return and not request. All right, so that's much better. But if this passes, we now want to validate the data the user has sent to this API. So this is going to be using the data schema we defined earlier. I want to call this safe pass method. And this is where we pass in the data the user has provided from the request body. So this is going to be a wait, request.json. So we convert the request to JSON. And what we want to do here is we want to go into grab the data, the error, and the success message. So this is going to be const success, data, and error. We can grab that from the safe pass method. If there is no success, or if this actually fails passing, what we can do is let the user know by returning the errors. But I'm just going to log this so that we can see the error in the console as well. So we can do a quick console the error, and we can pass in the error. Then we also want to let the user know that something went wrong. So this is going to be return new request, and we want to pass the error in the error.issues, and this is index 0.message, and we want to tell them that, hey, something went wrong by setting the right status code to 400, which is awesome. And that should let the user know if there was an error while trying to get data from the user's request. So the last thing I'm just going to do here is grab the data out, because at this stage, or at this point in the application, we're going to have the URL and also the email ready, which means everything was successful. The user's validation was all done correctly. So this is going to be const URL email, and we can grab that from the data key, and we can give this a save, and this looks good. It seems we have a typo here as well. Oh, so this should be a response and not a request. I don't know why my autocomplete isn't working right now, but this should be a response and not a request. All right, so that's much better. Now we can head over to the terminal and we can run this. So npm run dev, and we will have a local dev server running, which is exactly what we want. Now, what I'll do is I'll go open up my API testing tool, and we can take a look at this and see if everything works as expected. So I have Hopscotch running. It's an API testing tool. You can also use Postman, or you can use call if you like using the CLI, but we're going to be using Hopscotch for this. So I have my endpoint entered in with the right path, which is /send, and we are also having a request body with a URL and also an email. So if I hit the send button, you can see that this works. We get a 200 OK, and we get the hello world text, which means the last line of this application actually ran, which is awesome. But if I mess things up by not entering a correct email, for example, and I hit the send button, you can see that we get a response text telling us what's wrong, which in this case it's saying the email is invalid, and we get the right status text saying it's a bad request, which means we know we need to go fix the email. So again, fixing this, hitting the send button, everything works, which means our code works so far, and it's awesome right now. The next thing we're going to do is look at setting up the workflow that actually runs part of the applications. So let's get that done. So what we're going to do now is set up the workflow, and to remind you what the workflow is expected to do, I'm just going to head back to the repository here and let's take a look again at the architecture diagram. So when the worker receives this request, it spins off a workflow which has a bunch of steps. I think I should be able to zoom in so you can see this better. It spins off the workflow which has a couple of steps. In this case, just 3 steps. The first step checks to see if the article has been cached in the worker's KV store. Then the next step runs if the article hasn't been previously cached. So it goes to render the article and get it saved in the cache. That's basically what the next step is doing, but there's a bit more to it. We'll have the browser rendering API and a durable object with alarms and all of that stuff. Then lastly, the final step takes the article from the cache and sends it as an email attachment to the user's Kindle device, and that gets delivered. So let's write the workflow for this, or maybe the boilerplate for it, and then we'll go on to build it piece by piece. So let's go in to get this done. I'm going to head back to the application here, and I'm going to create a new file called workflow.ts. So in this file, we'll need to import a bunch of things from Cloudflare Workers. So we're importing a bunch of things from the Workers runtime, and I'll tell you what everything is. The first thing we're importing is the workflow entry point, which is the class that defines what a workflow is. Then we'll also import a workflow step, and we'll finally import a workflow event, and that's all we need. Then we need to build the workflow class. So we need to create a class that actually has the workflow and that runs all of the steps we just took a look at. So let's create a class. This is going to be export class because we need to have it exported. This is the name of your class. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call this class workflow, which extends the workflow entry point. And the workflow entry point has access to the environment and also the params which are passed to the workflow. All right. And this is going to have just one method, which is the run method. So this is the async run. All right. And the run method takes an event, which you already guessed is the workflow event. And that has some sort of payload which is passed as a parameter to it. So let's just define the type for this payload. So this is the payload, and in our case, we know that the only thing we'll be passing to this workflow is the user's email and also the URL of the article to be rendered. So let's define a type called payload. Type payload, which is going to have a URL string and also the user's email, which is a string. All right, so that's the payload type. And this also has a step, or receives a step, which is going to come from the Cloudflare Workers. So this is the Workers runtime workflow step. And then we can go on to start writing our workflow. So the first thing we need to do here is we need to get access to the user's URL and email, and we can get that from the events payload. So this is going to be const URL email, which is going to come from event the payload. All right, so we grab that from the payload. Then we can go on to start defining our steps. Remember, looking at the diagram here, the first step is checking to see if the article has been cached. And the reason we're caching the article is so as to skip re-rendering if we already have it cached and we don't have to like render the article each time we see that request. So the first thing I'm going to do here is do a check. So we can have a variable here called const is article cached, and what this is going to do is check to see if the article is cached. So this is going to be an async step, so we have to await it. Step.do, we want to check for article in cache. All right, and we'll have an async function here, which is an arrow function that returns a Boolean value, whether true or false, if this article is cached. We're not implementing the logic in this particular video, so what I'll just do is return false. So let's return false. All right, and then we can check to see if the article is not cached. What we can do now is go on to render the article using the browser rendering API. But again, this is just going to be a boilerplate step. We'll implement all of the details in another video. So this is going to be await step.do. And what we want to do is render and cache the article. So let's give this step a name called render and cache article. All right, and again, this is going to be a boilerplate, a sync function that doesn't do anything yet, but we'll come back to fix that. And lastly, what we want to do here is we want to create a step that sends the cached article, which has been rendered at this point, as an email to the user's Kindle device. So in this case, it's going to be it's going to have a state called email status, and this is going to be await step.do, and this is send article to user, and this is going to be an async step that has all of this and is empty right now. All right, it looks like we have a typo somewhere and we need to get it fixed. Okay, so it looks like we have a typo here. This should not be worker entry point, rather this should be workflow entry point. So that's the right class we should be importing. So let's go fix this here as well. So this should be workflow entry point. All right, with that, I guess you guys already caught this, but I forgot the from keyword. So this should be from. And with that, we have this workflow good to go. Now that we have this workflow completed, we can actually go in to start making use of the workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my wrangler.json file and add a binding for this workflow. So go on to open your wrangler.json file, and what I'm going to do here is I am going to copy paste this binding to add my workflow. So it's a binding called workflows, and this has a name, so you can name this whatever you want, and this is the name that is going to show up on your Cloudflare dashboard when you have your application deployed. Then you also want to tell it what binding key to use to access this through the environment. So in this case, this is going to be env. whatever you put in here. And lastly, you want to tell it what class name you used while creating the workflow class. So in my case, I just use workflow. If you use something else, this is where you put that in. All right, so this looks good. I am going to close the wrangler.json file, and we want to head back to the index.ts file. So what I'm going to do here in the index.ts file is I'll need to re-export the workflow class I created in a separate file. So this is going to be export workflow from the workflow class. So in this case, it's the workflow file. That's it. Then what I can do now, since everything is good to go, is I can go on to use the workflow. But before doing that, I need to regenerate the TypeScript type definition. So I'll need to head back to the terminal here. Let's clear the screen, and I will run the script to regenerate the Cloudflare types. So this is npm run cf typegen. And you can see we have workflow here because we just added the workflow binding. So now I can, now that's done, we can head back here and actually use the workflow. So down here, what I can do is spin off a workflow using the provided details of the user's email and user and URL, and then we can return the status of the workflow to the user. So let's do that. This is going to be const workflow equal to await env dot the binding name, which is workflow dot create, and we want to pass some parameters to this. So params is going to be an object containing the user's article URL and the email. And that's all we need to do. Then we can return the status back to the front end by returning a JSON response here. So this is going to be return response.json, and this is going to have the workflow ID, which is going to come from workflow.id. And we also can tell the user the details of this workflow. So this is details. This can come from await workflow.status. All right, that looks good. And now we can delete the last return, which was just returning the hello world text. So this looks good. Let's head back to run this. And we have the server running, and I can go back to my API testing tool and we can hit the send button, and you see this works. So this returns the workflow ID, which can be used to debug this workflow if you wanted to take a look at it locally. Then you also see we have the details of the workflow, the workflow status, and the created variables and everything that is in the state or memory of that workflow. So we have this done, which is awesome. And with this, we've been able to complete setting up the entry point worker and also the workflow that runs all of the steps. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you how to set up the article rendering using durable objects and browser rendering API. And then I'll also show you how to use KV to cache the article and check for the article in the cache and pull it back out of the cache if it's already cached. All right, that's awesome. I'm going to see you in the next video. Don't forget to get subscribed. Take care. Bye.